Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Before we begin today's session of the Hindu analysis, an important announcement. Tomorrow's class in the ongoing Target Prelims 2022 crash course, which is going live on our YouTube channel every evening at 7:30 p.m. The class tomorrow will be on science and technology. This will be class number 3 and we will be continuing to discuss all the important current affairs in the field of science and technology of the past 1 year or so. Do join us for that class as you have been doing with all the other subjects. Just a few more days remain for this crash course to conclude. So make sure that you attend each and every class to take advantage of this ongoing crash course. This is free of cost and every aspirant can come and attend the class. All that you have to do is log in to the YouTube channel of BYJU'S IAS at 7:30 p.m. in the evening sharp. Now let's begin today's analysis. The first article that we have for you is again on the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war and the option that India has before itself. Now, if you read the international and the Indian media, there are diverse points of views about what options does India have right now. The author here is giving a slightly pessimistic point of view by arguing that initially when the war began, everyone around the world thought that India is in a very strong position because of our good terms with Russia. And that is why we saw last month there was a flurry of foreign diplomats visiting India. Many high level officials from very important nations visited India, trying to convince India to change its stand or asking India to convince the Russian government to scale down their aggression. At that point of time, we had thought that maybe India's point of being a neutral country all through the war or not supporting any of the sanctions that are being imposed by the Western nations may be a positive point, and India would now have a strong position in the world. But the author is saying that the times have changed. In the past 2 or 3 weeks, you have seen that not a lot of importance is now being given to India by the Western nations because they have understood that India might not be in a position to convince Russia to stop their invasion. On the other hand, India also has its own problems now. As per the author, India now faces an even more serious challenge with respect to China, as was the case earlier. And the author here is giving three reasons for the same. Number one, as per the author, Russia is no longer a key strategic partner for India in the sense that now Russia is more dependent on India as compared to the other way around. The reason is that right now, Russia has only a few nations that are still agreeing to buying gas and oil and coal from Russia. And India is one of them. India, in fact, has promised Russia to increase its oil buying from Russia. We'll also be going ahead with the S-400 defense deal and other deals that were in the pipeline earlier as well. So, right now, India is a ray of hope for Russia rather than the other way around. So now we cannot use Russia as a counterweight to other problems that are going on. That is the first reason as per the author. Second reason as per the author is that now Russia is much more focused on the Western nations and on what is going on in the Ukraine region. That is why they will be absent from Asia and they won't be thinking about the Asian continent as such, giving a lot more space to China to exert its influence in the region now that Russia would have other priorities. Thirdly, even the US and the other Western powers would now be much more interested in dealing with Russia and how to ensure that NATO becomes more powerful with nations such as Sweden and Finland applying for NATO. That means that US and the Western nations would not have Indo-Pacific as a top priority in their mind as they had a few months back in the form of Quad and other groupings that were being formed. That means that there is a concern for India because India, unlike the US and Western nations, can't afford to neglect the Indo Pacific because it is in our neighborhood. And now we have to contend with China and the Chinese threat all alone because most probably US and other Western nations would be more occupied with the other challenges that are facing them. This is the author's point of view here. The only good part in all this, as per the author, is that we are not seeing some aggression from the Chinese side in the past few months, especially ever since the Ukraine-Russia war began. In fact, during the visit of Chinese Foreign Minister to India recently, Chinese Foreign Minister had urged India to come back to normal and resume normal trade relations between the two sides. In fact, it was India and India's Foreign Minister who said that our priority is first to disengage the troops on the Indian side of the LAC, only then the things will go back to normal. But the interesting part is that while our foreign minister and our NSA had taken such a strong line against China, our Prime Minister's decision to attend the BRICS summit that will be hosted by China later this year goes against this message. So, on the one hand, we are asking China to prioritize disengagement of the troops. On the other hand, we are making our decision to attend the BRICS summit in China, which could potentially be contrary to the message that we had given the Chinese foreign minister earlier. The author is saying that Chinese appeal to bring the situation back to normal with India may also be a sign that China is now establishing itself as the leader in the region. Because as a leader in the region, they are acting out as if they are the ones who are concerned about peace throughout the region. So that also might not be a great sign for India. The other slightly good news for India is that in terms of the LOC with respect to Pakistan, things have been quite calm in the past year or so. But that is not because Pakistan has had a change of hearts. That is mostly because Pakistan has been preoccupied with its own problems. First, Taliban's return to Afghanistan, and second, Pakistan's own internal politics is what keeping its political class and the army busy. Maybe once the situation stabilizes in Pakistan, they will again bring back their focus on disturbing peace in India, and that is when a dual challenge will arise. And as per the author, India has to be prepared for that in advance. Now, this topic with respect to Russia Ukraine war, China's point of view, India's point of view, all this has been discussed multiple times in the past. So, what is new in it that we have to discuss? Now, what is new in this is recently, there was a survey that was conducted inside China, specifically where people were asked their points of view about other nations in the world. Their point of view about Russia, their point of view about India, US, Pakistan, etc. Let me share with you some very, very interesting results of that survey. One of the questions was that how positively or negatively do you view these nations? Now look at this very carefully. This blue parameter means very positive and this dark red parameter means very negative. See where USA and India are. USA is being seen as the most negative country by Chinese. At the second place we have Japan, and guess what? At the third place we have India. So India is being viewed as the third most negative country by the Chinese right now. And do you know which is the most positive country that the Chinese view right now? The first rank is taken by Pakistan, which is viewed as the most positive country by the Chinese, followed up by Russia. So you can see where the priorities of even the common people of Chinese lie. And there were many, many other questions that were asked. For example, one of the questions was, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of Russia? And the word that many people said was a warrior state. That Russia is a warrior state and it will make sure that its own people are always defended. One of the other questions that was asked in the survey was, how positively or negatively do you assess the foreign policy of these nations? And no surprises, they voted the highest for China. So they said that our own foreign policy is the best, followed by Russia, and again, the country with the least number of votes was India and the US. So again, as you can see, it's not just the government, even the common perception inside of China is as such that India does not see eye to eye with China. Now, it may be a propaganda that is being run by the Communist Party or it may be the media channels, but that is what the harsh reality is as per this survey in China. The next article that we have here is about the AICTE, that is the All India Council of Technical Education. Now, the author here is making a point that we all are well aware of, that is the declining level of technical education in India. The reason why this article has been written specifically is because recently there was a report that the AICTE has fixed the upper and the lower limit of fees that can be charged by technical institutions that offer courses such as engineering, architecture, etc. The author here is saying that if you look at how technical education has expanded in India, you will see that right now we have many, many more institutions than what we require. If you look at the example of 1961 to 1991, in these 3 decades, the number of institutions that offered technical higher education courses increased 5 times from 53 to 277. Mostly they were government run institutions. And the number of students at the same time increased by 6 times. So number of students opting for technical education reached from 37,000 to 2.16 lakh. 1991, as you know, was a watershed moment in India's history with the LPG reforms being introduced. Now look at 3 decades after 1991. In the next 3 decades, the number of institutions went up by 40 times. And since these institutions increased by 40 times, the number of seats that they had in total were about 32.85 lakh. In comparison, if you look at year after year numbers of people who are actually giving the examinations for entrance in engineering colleges, by any estimate, the number of engineering aspirants in India every year are just about 20 lakh. So just imagine, for 20 lakh students, all of whom may not even be eligible to become engineers, we have a total of 32.85 lakh seats. Now the result is very simple. In many of the engineering colleges, especially the ones which are not well known, most of the seats are vacant. As a result of which they are going into losses. Now that is why it was a demand from the side of these institutions specifically to the AICTE that please fix not just the maximum fees but the minimum fees as well that an engineering college can charge to the students, because these are the colleges that are now being forced to shut down because they don't have enough students, and in order to keep running they want minimum fees also to be set, which is a demand that AICTE has accepted now. Because of low enrollment in these institutions, the student teacher ratio is also very low. Now, low student teacher ratio usually means a good level of education, but in these institutions that is not the case. In these institutions, the low student teacher ratio is because there are just not enough students taking admissions. Now, even out of these 20 lakh students, we all know that in the top engineering colleges such as the IITs, NITs, the triple ITs, etc., or the topmost private engineering colleges, all the seats are filled. So the remaining people who want to pursue engineering, they opt for the other colleges, which have many more seats as compared to the number of students that are coming into them. This is where the AICTE has a responsibility. Yes, they can set up the minimum fee, that is fine, but at the end of the day, the AICTE is also responsible for ensuring at least a minimum quality of technical education that is being provided to the students. So they can't just fix the minimum fee. They also have to ensure that the institutions that are offering these kind of courses are actually offering good quality to these students, which is not really the case. That is what the author is pointing out towards. That okay, fixing the minimum fee may be good for these institutions, but what about the guidelines for quality of education which AICTE has not really been looking into? We all know for a fact that except the top few engineering colleges in India, most other engineering colleges do not provide the kind of education that is required. And that is why even after passing out and even after getting that graduation degree of engineering, a lot of engineers in India are not really worthy of a job, and that is why many of them either don't get a job, or even if they do get a job, that is not really something that pays them handsomely as compared to what other engineers actually get. And that is what the problem is. Now, as I said earlier, the reason why this article is written is because in the month of April, the AICTE had suggested an education ministry panel to fix minimum and maximum fee for the engineering colleges. Now, usually we talk about fixing maximum fees so that the students are not exploited in all the engineering colleges. But the interesting part is that even the minimum fee is fixed so that we can help those engineering colleges which are being forced to shut down. Now, the matter goes back to 2015 when a committee was formed under the chairmanship of retired Supreme Court Judge Justice B.N. Sri Krishna. In 2015, this committee had suggested that there should be a cap on the maximum fees of the engineering colleges. The committee had fixed a maximum fee of 1.57 lakh to 1.71 lakh per annum for MBA courses and 1.44 to 1.58 lakh for 4-year engineering programs for per year. Exact fee depend on the location of the institution, infrastructure, etc. As I said earlier, it was the colleges that started demanding a minimum fee range as well so that they can also sustain. And now the AICTE has suggested a minimum range of 75,000 to 85,000 per annum to be charged by these institutions, which can help these institutions sustain in the long run. The next article that we have here focuses on public health engineering. Now, in very simple terms, the point that is being made by the author here is that in India, we regard engineering and public health as two very separate disciplines, which should not be the case. As per the author, there should be a specialized field of engineering where people are taught about public health and public health infrastructure. Only and only then we would be able to arrive at a solution of our existing problems. The author here is saying that you can see the infrastructure of wastewater management that we have in India. And you would see that we have a very bad infrastructure quality. The main reason being that the people who are responsible for building this infrastructure and maintain this infrastructure are not who have the required skills. That is mainly because we have not focused on public health engineering. For a long time, for us, engineering is a different field and public health is a separate field. The only thing that we have is that people who are for civil engineering, during their 4-year courses, they do get a few optional courses in which they are taught about water supply and water supply related infrastructure, etc. But not a lot of focus is actually put into this, and that is why we have not been able to solve this problem. If you look at numbers around the world and in India, you would realize how big the problem is. Around 80% of wastewater flows back into the ecosystem without being treated as per the UN. In India, 70% of sewage is discharged untreated into India's water bodies. So just imagine the waste water that we have. It can be waste of many kinds. It can be household waste, it can be industrial waste, it can be agricultural waste. It flows back without being cleaned into India's water bodies. The same water bodies in which people take a bath or people use that water for multiple purposes, which is why 21% of the diseases in India are caused by contaminated water only, as per the World Bank. That is, more than 1/5 of diseases in India are just due to the dirty water that we have. That is why this problem is huge and we need to control it as soon as possible. The solution here, as per the author, is to focus on a specialized cadre of public health engineers, also known as environmental engineers, who shall be taught, trained, and they should be given capacity building tools to ensure that they can handle these kind of issues. As I said, the best that we have right now is civil engineering students getting one or two small courses on environmental engineering, etc., where they read about wastewater management. But this is not a specialization which is offered at any of our leading institutions. While India aims to supply 55 liters of water per day by 2024, we must ensure that we have enough clean water at our disposal in order to achieve this particular mission. The author here is taking an example of Europe. So in Europe, for example, a candidate must specialize in wastewater engineering, and only then the candidate gets a job at the wastewater treatment plant. In India, that is not the case. In India, while the engineers prefer to work at some other institutions, the people who are actually in charge with wastewater management and these kind of infrastructure don't have the engineering prowess that is required in this particular sector. And that is why we have to match these two together. Given the population growth that we have and given the usage of water that we have, which is constantly increasing in India, we have to think about it very seriously, because this problem can be solved if we put these two combinations together. Now, just to present a few numbers with respect to the wastewater treatment in India and highlight how big the problem is. Now, the sewage treatment plants in India are able to treat very little wastewater as compared to what we produce as a country every single day. As per a report by the Central Pollution Control Board, India produces 72,368 million liters per day of wastewater, out of which the installed capacity, not that everything is working, but installed capacity is to treat 31,841, that is 43.9% of this water. But of this installed capacity also, the operational capacity is of only 26,869 million liters per day. In short, out of the entire wastewater that we produce in India, only 20,235 million liter per day is being treated, which is close to 30% of what we are actually producing. Means over 70% of our wastewater is not being treated every single day, and it is going straight into the water bodies. Of this also, the problem is huge in some states, while the infrastructure is better in some other states. Five states and UTs like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, Delhi, and Karnataka account for 60% of the total installed capacity in the country. The only one positive example that stands out is Chandigarh. It is first in terms of the total sewage generated because it can treat all the wastewater that it generates. It generates 188 million litre of wastewater per day, while it has an operational capacity to treat up to 271. That is a good example that we need to follow, but there are many states in India that have no sewage treatment plants, including Arunachal Pradesh, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Manipur, Meghalaya, and Nagaland, and that is why we need to work very soon in these areas. The next article is about one of the most basic principles that you read in Indian economics, that is a repo rate. We have discussed multiple times about repo rate now, ever since the RBI increased the repo rate by 40 basis points, that is by 0.4%, bringing it to 4.4% and surprising the entire country. We all have discussed that the RBI announced this because of the increasing inflation in the country. The reason is it is presumed and it is thought that once the repo rate increases, the banks will not have access to easy money and the liquidity in the market will reduce and the demand for the commodities will come down, thus reducing the prices. Let's go through these basics once again so that all of you are clear on this. Repo rate, as you know, is simply the rate of interest at which the banks can take money from the RBI. So banks such as ICICI, HDFC, SBI, whenever they want money from the RBI on a short-term basis, they can go to RBI, give some government securities, and in return, they can take money from the banks at an interest rate which is called the repo rate. Repo stands for repurchase. So the bank is promising the RBI that at a later date we will repurchase these government securities from you and we will pay you a rate of interest which is called the repo rate. Now higher this repo rate, more difficult it would be for the banks to take money from the RBI. Simple. The lower this rate is, the easier it would be for the banks to take money from the RBI. So whenever the RBI feels that there is inflation in the country, the RBI wants to suck out money from the circulation, and that is what the RBI does. The RBI increases the repo rate, and that is what they have done now also. That is how the repo rate has now become 4.4%. As you know, India is going through a very high inflation stage right now. As you would have read, there are two types of inflation: demand pull and cost push. Demand pull inflation is that all of a sudden a lot of people have a lot more money with them and they are demanding many more commodities as compared to what is required. Let's assume the government, as per their promise, deposits 15 lakh rupees in each and everyone's account right now. Now, because everyone has 15 lakh rupees extra, everyone will be demanding more things from the market. You will be buying more cars, more bikes, more laptops or mobile phones, while the capacity of the manufacturer remains the same. Because there is more demand, the prices will automatically go up. This is called demand pull inflation. On the other hand, the cost push inflation is when the demand is the same as usual, but just that the supply of the goods has reduced. There is some problem at the supplier end and they are not being able to produce wheat or rice or mobile phones, and because the demand is the usual, people are now willing to pay more price because there are lesser commodities that are available. That is what happens in case of onion price rise or lemon price rise. That is called cost push inflation. So the RBI assumes that when we withdraw money from the market circulation, people would not be able to demand more, demand will reduce, and automatically the inflation will come down. Now, the reason why it has not happened even after RBI has increased the repo rate till today is because it takes some time to happen in the real economy. It's not that today the repo rate increases and tomorrow inflation will come down. The result of this in the market will be seen in the coming weeks, and that is what everyone is waiting for. Now, there are a lot of views about why RBI did this. We've also seen how the stock market has crashed down in the past 10 days or so ever since the RBI announced this. However, the other part of the news is that as per the reports, RBI will increase these rates once again in the June meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee because inflation is still increasing and the RBI does not want to take that chance. So be ready for another increase in the repo rate. One other point is that RBI is not an outlier in this case, meaning that The central banks across the world are actually doing this. It is not just the RBI, because inflation problem is now being seen in countries around the world. In US, in fact, inflation is going even more than India, where inflation in the US has touched 8.5%. So the US Federal Reserve also, that is a US central bank, has also increased its repo rate. And that is why it is not just the RBI that is an outlier, it is the central banks across the world. As you can see here, the US Federal Reserve increased its repo rate by half a percentage point, which was the biggest hike in 2 decades in order to fight inflation. So, this is a theory in which the central banks across the world believe, and it is not just in India that we are following this theory in order to control inflation. The next article that we have here is about the Sustainable Development Goals and the report that is given by the Niti Aayog. Now, do remember this article is written by a Rajya Sabha member of parliament from Odisha. And because he's a Rajya Sabha member of parliament from Odisha and represents the BJD, that is the ruling party in Odisha, this entire article is actually based on how well Odisha has performed in the Sustainable Development Goals. So don't think that Odisha has left all the states behind, and that is why Odisha is being shown in such a shining light in this article. It is because the author belongs to Odisha and he wants to present a good picture. Also, this is not a breaking news. This is one of those articles that the newspaper publishes when they don't have enough news, because it did not happen now. It is a news of some months back, but just that they thought this might be a good day to publish this article. Maybe they did not have anything else in the editorial. So the Niti Aayog report of 2020-21 came up, which talks about how respective Indian states and union territories are performing on sustainable development goals. This is called the Sustainable Development Goal India Index. As per the report, the states are given a score from 0 to 100 depending upon how they are performing in each of these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The good news as per the author is that in the latest report of the SDG, no state scored below 50. So every state has managed to score above 50. So no one is in the bottommost category, which is called the aspirant category. On the other hand, 13 states are in the performer category, and then 15 states are in the front runner category. So front runner is the one that is second from the top, performer category is the third from the top, and aspirant category is the fourth from the top. India as a whole also is now in the front runner category around the world, that is in the second category from the top. Now the article here, as I said earlier, is bringing a lot of attention to Odisha and its performance. The author is saying that Odisha has topped the entire country, specifically in two sustainable development goals, number 13 and number 14. Number 13 is climate action, while number 14 is life below water. He is also given examples of what the Odisha government has done in order to achieve this. Odisha government, for example, has managed to save 120 tons of CO2 per 1000 population just by using the LED bulbs. In terms of life below water, the government of Odisha has aimed to conserve oceans, seas, marine resources, and also ensured that illegal fishing practices are banned and strict action is taken against them. Odisha, in fact, was the first state in India to introduce a climate budget in financial year 2021. Not just this, in 2022, the Odisha government, in fact, submitted a separate SDG budget, which was again for the first time in India that indicated that the state is taking these goals very, very seriously. And we are seeing these results all across the state now. While the entire country is working together to achieve these goals as soon as possible, as per the author, the fact remains that we are still lying behind in certain goals. For example, no poverty, quality education, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation, climate change are still some of the goals where India is a lot behind as compared to its peers, and we need to catch up very, very soon. This is where the problem lies, and the country can take lessons from Odisha as well. This is a snippet from the report of the Niti Aayog, which talks about the 2020 index score. These are the top states that performed very well in certain areas. As you can see, Odisha was at the top for climate action and life below water. Punjab scored the most for sustainable cities and communities. Kerala was at the top when it comes to zero hunger and quality education. On the other hand, Tamil Nadu scored well when it comes to no poverty. All the other states also you can see here in this particular snippet. Like in the previous years also, Kerala managed to remain at the top, followed by Tamil Nadu and Himachal Pradesh, each of which scored 74. Then we had Andhra Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Goa, Karnataka. At the bottom we have Bihar with 52, Jharkhand 56, Assam 57, UP, Arunachal and Meghalaya, each of which have a score of 60. As you can see here, the first category is of achievers, where no state has reached so far. Second category is front runners, then performer, and then the last category of aspirant, where we don't have any state as of now in India. Amongst the union territories, it is Chandigarh that has the highest score of 79. In fact, if you see states and union territories combined, Chandigarh would have the highest score so far. This is also a snippet of the SDG budget that was introduced by the government of Odisha, the first ever state in India to take such a step. These were the articles we wanted to discuss from the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. What are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Assess the progress made by India towards these goals and identify the problem areas that still persist. Second, throw light on the issue of wastewater management in India. What are some of the problems we are facing in improving our wastewater treatment capacity? Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.